Hi everyone, I'm Geraldine from Sage, and welcome back to our video series featuring our title, Project Management, Creating Sustainable Value. In today's video, we're covering a key aspect of project management known as managing multiple stakeholders. Projects do not happen in isolation, and how you manage stakeholders can make or break your project. So let's dive in. Stuart, let's start with you. What does it mean to manage stakeholders in the context of a project?
Well, who are the stakeholders in the project? Some obvious contenders are the project owners and the project clients, but there are also the employees engaged in projects. They're also stakeholders in them. These people will want to work in rewarding, safe, and secure contexts, and other people need to be considered as well. Contractors, consultants, customers. Not only these, also users of the product output. There are also the communities that might be affected by the project, those that might experience its effects, whether positively or adversely. But not just people. What might be the effects of a specific project on flora and fauna, on other forms of life? In the past, nature has been regarded simply in terms of externalities to projects. If rivers were used as dumps for waste materials, the atmosphere polluted, or a habitat was destroyed or damaged, who cared? Today, with active social media and activist social movements, project owners and managers need to care. If they don't care, it can affect the bottom line. Stakeholders may have positive or negative interests, or they may have both in the project. Projects can choose to include or exclude their voice. Some stakeholders will merit inclusion because they have resources that make project execution or delivery better. Others make it problematic to implement the project according to the framework adopted. To be held at arm's length is often the fate of civil society groups mobilizing against a project, and this can be a mistake. Sometimes they may have positive ideas for improving value, and modern project management must meet negative stakeholders in a justifiable and respectful way and engage them in learning and consultation. Projects can benefit from the value of inputs that stakeholders can provide, and not just those stakeholders that they want to speak to, but also those stakeholders that want to speak to them. How to do stakeholder analysis? Well, the first thing is to acknowledge who the stakeholders are. And if we can, we try to specify what their interests are. We may not always know. And if we can, we should try to respond to their interests, and we may not always be able to. This is the process of stakeholder engagement, and the screen shows how to do it once we're clear about who the stakeholders are. The stakeholders need to be identified, analysed, prioritised. We need to develop strategies to deal with them in terms of measures. We need to implement the measures, and we need to evaluate the results of those measures. And we need to be aware that this is not just something we do as a one-off exercise. It's something which goes on through the life of the project, because as the temporalities and phases of the project change and unfold, then the stakeholder engagement, the degrees of stakeholder engagement, and the different stakeholders wax and wane with the project itself. Then there's a question of what to do.
That's really cool. Tucker, what are some practical tools that project managers can use to manage such a diverse range of stakeholders?
Well, that sure is important, as projects tend to be complex and involve multiple stakeholders. As Stuart was into when presenting the six-step process for stakeholder collaboration, analyzing the stakeholders, especially the most influential ones, is essential. The project owner is the primary one responsible for this. However, in practice, the project leader and her team will most likely do this when the projects are in the planning phase and when they are up and running. Therefore, a structured approach will be beneficial for all types of projects, including complex and more agile projects. You need to communicate with stakeholders actively. We also recommend using digital tools to keep track of stakeholder engagement. These tools allow project managers to communicate clearly and address any issues early. Planning ahead prevents surprises and builds stronger relationships with your stakeholders. Most projects have some form of stakeholder analysis, which could be a helpful start for developing a structured plan for involvement. In our new edition of our book, we have included various features. One such feature is digital toolboxes, one of which is a stakeholder involvement plan, which you could see, which you could use in your project. In short, a stakeholder involvement plan will help you and project manager identify their stakeholders and understand their needs. It's not enough just to identify them. You need to engage them actively throughout the project's life cycle. It does so by clarifying for each measures, strategies and tasks identified. Identify what will need to be done or communicated to stakeholders during the project. When should communication be done? How should this be done, including what channel or format should be used? Who has the responsibility for this communication? So this is just an example of one of the toolboxes included in our book. And as you can see, it's a structured approach to ensuring stakeholders' involvement is handled actively in projects.
And Liv, what are some of your thoughts around managing stakeholders in a sustainable way?
First of all, you need to recognize that project management is all about involving stakeholders and moving groups of stakeholders in the same direction, trying to make it a purposeful and meaningful journey. This is very much about making sense in an ambitious and complex setting. So, when talking about sustainable value, 4 activities become most important. First, include stakeholders broadly. Activate them early, collaborate closely with the most important ones, and give voiceless stakeholders a voice. So the perspective of sustainability makes it important to take a broad perspective on who the stakeholders are. For example, including the silent ones Stuart already mentioned. So while animals and nature are silent stakeholders, communities can give them a voice. That is obviously important in terms of caring for them, but it might also become a strategic choice. We elaborate on this in a book in chapter 10. Some Danish colleagues have written a fascinating story of how frogs were translated from being non-existent into strategic actors in a construction project. Our Danish colleagues studied a firm that bought land to develop residence. As they were ready to start construction work, they discovered waterholes on the site inhabited by more than 500 protected frogs. The project came to a halt as the frogs became a contested object with several spokespersons claiming to know what was in the frogs' best interests. After a while, the development firm chose to hire their own frog experts to find ways the frogs could coexist with the construction workers and trucks and all the noise and destruction of habitat that these would create. That meant, for example, learning to adapt to the cyclical time of the frog's life as opposed to linear time of project execution. It also meant constructing devices to protect the frogs, such as corridors through which they could move without being bulldozed. The story has a happy ending when the frogs became heroes in a marketing campaign to sell the completed residence. For who wouldn't want to live in a natural idyll with protected moor frogs? I think this is a really nice story about the silent stakeholder, the frog, becoming a strategic actor shaping the future significantly.
Thank you all for joining us. We hope you found this video insightful and was able to pick up some tips and tricks on how to manage multiple stakeholders in your project. If you have any experiences or comments, please feel free to drop them down below. I'd love to hear from you guys. We've come to the end of this video, but please do stay tuned for our next video. We'll be discussing and covering about navigating uncertainty in your projects. I'm Geraldine from Sage, bringing to you a Sage title called Project Management Creating Sustainable Value. This title is also available on Sage Catalyst. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.